Hey everyone, I just played Decade, a point-and-click, we're not breaking the cycle of samsara on this one lads, simulator by one-person indie developer Last Python, where you, a 17-year-old, send children even younger than yourself back to the past for 10 years at a time in an attempt to prevent the end of the world you are now living through by changing the course of history. It's a game that is as strange as it is compelling, so let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, I do want to disclose that the dev provided me a copy for review. I'm glad too, I never would have taken a chance on Decade if not, and now that I have, I'd say yeah, it's worth your time. There were some things that made me raise an eyebrow or two, but they didn't ruin the experience, and if you're a fan of weird games with weird stories, it's a definite must play. Usually when I make these videos I play the game in question and then take a little time to stew on it, maybe watch through the recordings again to take notes, formulate some ideas, but not in this case. I finished a Decade less than an hour ago as of writing, and I can't put it aside. I have to talk about it. It's that sort of game. I don't think I've ever played anything quite like it, and if what I've said so far has piqued your interest, go play it. Try out the demo. Go in as blind as you possibly can. I promise it's not as confusing as it appears to be. Just save often and you'll be golden. And on that note, I'm slapping down a big old spoiler warning, because the joy of playing Decade is discovering all the weird alternate timelines you can conjure into being through your temporal meddling. There is some wild stuff to find, and I don't even know how wild it potentially gets, because I haven't even found half of Decade's 20 endings. I capped out at 8. So yeah, if you're interested, go play it, come back, let me know what you thought, and if not, feel free to keep watching. I'm pretty sure those of you who do play through it will end up going on a very different journey to myself. The game is just that deep. That depth does come at a cost though. In order to provide so many narrative paths, the mechanics had to be scaled back to almost nothing. This is the entire game, a map of time periods, an inventory, and the last 3 human beings in existence. When sending one of the kids back, you can assign them goals, you can give them items, and you can mix and match the two together in order to secure a desired outcome. But that's the extent of your influence over what happens once they step inside the time machine. What occurs over their 10-year tour of duty is only told to you by them upon their return. Sometimes the change is minimal. Maybe the kids adopt a certain school of thought or become timid or violent depending on how old they are when you send them through and where you send them to. Maybe they bring back items to use in other periods of history like propaganda or newspapers or a gun. Or maybe the change is so substantial that an entirely new timeline emerges as a result of their actions. Or maybe nothing happens at all. Decade's gameplay is like a puzzle in that way. The right person at the right time with the right item can change the fate of humanity itself. You can send someone back, destroy the weather manipulation project that ended the world in your original timeline, and somehow end up with an even worse apocalypse. Everyone still died, but hey, at least it's a different colour. Of course, given that specific change is made only one period back from the present, it was also kind of inevitable. The world was already too far gone by that point. Killing one man isn't going to change much of anything. To make the most impact, you have to go back further. Not just decades, but centuries into the past. You have to weaponize everything you learn about every permutation of history. You have to topple entire ideologies and maybe even restore them later on when things don't go the way you want them to. It sounds like so much, and yet the game is still just this. You send the kids back, and you talk to them, and you examine items, and that's the extent of Decade's mechanical complexity. Not that it actually needed to be more complex. There's a real artistry to it that keeps the focus where it should be, on the story. If you had more options than kill, learn, help, or subvert when giving the kids tasks while sending them back, it'd be overwhelming overwhelming, and as it is, it's still very easy to get a dud result where nothing changes, even when you know more or less what you're trying to do. But the streamlined design does mean you'll get a result eventually. It's why you should save at every opportunity. Those kids aren't getting any younger. You can't afford to waste a decade of their lives on nothing. Even if you do though, the experience does give them the lay of the land, and upon return they'll usually have some advice on how to actually make progress. Whether or not the progress is good, well, you don't know until it's done. There's no going back either. Once the change is made, every subsequent period from that original timeline is snuffed out. The greyed out tiles get erased upon loading a save sometimes, which I think is a little unfortunate. Just imagine the temporal graveyard you can amass by the time you find a future worth living in. All those possibilities gone, remembered only by 4 people in an underground bunker from a world so fucked, they were all that remained. These little black circles on each time period indicate how many capital B big temporal forks in the river you can make with them, so the game does throw you a bone regarding which periods to focus on, but you can still learn a lot by checking out each and every era. There's just not enough time to see it all. The kids each have around 8 trips in them. That's 24 turns to save humanity from extinction, if you're lucky. When you're first starting out, there are definitely going to be a few wasted years, and so I'm not surprised the developer added a how to play video to the Steam page, but I also think that's kind of the point. You're just a bunch of kids trying to save the world. You're meant to feel lost, like you're grasping in the dark for something that may not even be there. I'm usually not a fan of time restrictions in video games, but in Decade it worked because it felt appropriate. It made the stakes so much more visceral. I was willing to take risks and explore every possible time period I discovered early on when the kids were young, but as they aged into their 60s and 70s, suddenly every trip required a lot more thought. I had to balance the risk of possibly wasting a decade of their lives on a fruitless expedition with potentially finding a way to a better future, and in the unexplored time periods, it was a complete gamble. It genuinely felt like I was running out of time to set things right, and this was while saving at every big change. The years start coming and they don't stop coming. There's no escaping it. Even if you do try to save scum, you're limited to free slots, so it's not a total cheese. It's just enough to give you some space for exploration and experimentation, while also keeping you chained to the clock. My one mechanical criticism is that sometimes you get access to info or ideas to influence a time period that the kids never actually learned about on a previous visit. This happened a lot with specific individuals. I'd send one of the kids back, get a broad overview of the decade upon their return, but still be given the option to help or hinder certain people in the preparation screen despite only actually learning about them specifically from the free on a subsequent expedition. After a while I just learned to work around it, but it is jarring when it happens early on. I think sometimes the item notifications don't pop up correctly either, because I'd occasionally go back to the inventory screen and discover like 20 extra bits of crap to sift through that the game never told me I had, and the two issues might actually be related given a lot of the items are interactive. You can open them up and give them a read, something I didn't discover until about halfway through my playthrough, because the way it communicates you can do that is a bit jank, and I'm wondering if the game just adds the info they contain to the preparation screens the second you acquire them, rather than upon opening them up in the inventory, which would explain why they seem to pop up out of nowhere sometimes. I don't know. There's also the fact the game doesn't offer much feedback on what so many of the options do. Dialogue sometimes comes off as repetitive, and many of the inventory items feel kind of useless a lot of the time. These things didn't ruin the whole experience for me, but they did stick out. One thing that did make me grumble were the performance issues. A bunch of Steam reviews bring up that Decade likes to crash, but I didn't actually experience any myself while recording footage for the review, almost like the game was behaving itself in front of the camera. Though, once I jumped back back in to search out some more endings, I went through a period where it felt like the thing would crash to desktop every single turn. It happened a lot right after reloading a save, so I don't think the game enjoys constant save scumming, but thankfully I almost never lost progress. Upon restart, it had just dropped me right back where I was with an autosave, though if the crash occurred during a temporal shift, I'd have to reload because the kid would still age, but the timeline would stay the same. These issues had to fight to get my attention though. Decade has a very aggressive sense of presentation that goes a long way in making up for how little of its myriad time periods you actually get to see. I don't even know how you'd describe Decade's art style. It's like a 90s website having a bad trip. Everything is so harsh and distorted in both colour and composition, especially the HUD, but it's also oddly serene. At first I thought it was entirely 2D, but then I opened up the inventory and discovered the amazing three-dimensional spinning sniper rifle one of the kids brought back as a souvenir from the not quite almost end of the world, and somehow it fits. It might seem like random shapes and visual noise at first, but there's clearly intent behind the look, and it evokes the feeling that you're messing with ancient tech at the end of the world. It feels laser-focused, like an adherent of Nerolianism on suggesting the idea of what the game can otherwise only show through text as well. If you hover over the portraits at the bottom of the screen, they move. Not only that, they change as the kids grow older. If you investigate items in the inventory, you'll discover each of them are built to resemble the period from which they originated. The treatise on humanity's so-called psychic wound looks very different to the newspapers printed in a completely separate timeline. Given the scope of the game, it was always going to be impossible to visually depict absolutely everything the text describes, but where there is room to show something off, Decade takes the opportunity without hesitation. I especially love the pictures made to represent each time period because they do a great job of providing a baseline of imagery from which your own imagination can build. The fact you only get the pictures once you learn a little about the time periods is perfect. Before that point, they're just a big old question mark surrounded by static. If you get bored of the way the game looks, there are a bunch of backgrounds to cycle through and HUD themes to unlock too. The default theme has the inventory icon as a weird orange box, but the Vetiverist theme changes it to an eldritch hand reaching down through a layer of smog, and the Cedarist theme switches it to a very literal chest. The different themes change the backing music and button sound effects too. Befitting the medieval imagery, the Cedarist backing track sounds like something out of an old-timey tavern. But the Vetiverist version is a deep and distorted industrial tune that is as haunting as it is harsh. And I don't even fucking know what's going on with the lesbian ghost orgy. The default track, by contrast, is downright ordinary with its constant record scratch and occasional skip, appropriate given your quest to undo the apocalypse by changing the past. As with the visuals, Decade's audio is a massive mess of samples and sound effects taken from all over the place and kit-bashed together in a way that is at once discordant and harmonious. These things shouldn't work together. They shouldn't work the way Last Python has used them for little HUD bleeps and bloops, and yet somehow they do. Somehow it all coheres into an audio-visual style that's not only captivating, but conveys all the things it wants to show you, but can't. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the game's 20 FMV endings. Some of them are long, some of them are short, some of them are abstract, some of them bring the story to a close, some of them are coherent, some of them aren't, but they're all incredible. They're the perfect reward for your efforts. A brief moment where the game really lets loose and shows you the worlds you create firsthand. And given they are so much fun, I'm only going to show you one, because they're absolutely worth playing the game to find yourself. Now keep in mind, that's one of the less interesting endings I came across. There are worlds I found that are way weirder, and way more depressing, and I'm eager to jump back in and find the others that I missed. Skimming through the Steam reviews, I did see people mentioning that the wrong FMV sometimes played on certain endings for them, but it wasn't an issue I ever encountered myself, so your mileage may vary. You also get these little vignettes whenever you send one of the kids back in time to signify the trip. The game still can't show you much, but the way conversations you've had with the kid in question sprawl across the screen, and sometimes you hear the machine winding up to activate, and sometimes weird images fade in and out, all comes together to convey the importance and length of the journey. If the expeditions passed by with the click of a button, it just wouldn't hit right. It needs that pause to build anticipation for the outcome. Altogether, the presentation builds an atmosphere of exhaustion and hopelessness that I can only describe as Eastern European. It's just got the vibe. It's bleak, it's miserable, but there's also a single spark of possibility that can be fanned into a fire of a better future if you fight hard enough to find it. But Decade's most impressive feat is that it managed to do the impossible. It made time travel interesting again. Time travel is one of the hardest storytelling tropes to play with because there are effectively no rules, no limits. Whether you're dealing with a case of everything has already happened and thus changes can't be made, or anything goes butterfly effect insanity. The Terminator films are a great example of the phenomenon in both styles, given the 1984 original adheres to the former and the 1991 sequel follows the latter instead, and both treat the concept seriously in their own ways. But once you get to Genesis and Dark Fate, the time travel is little more than an excuse to hurl random crap at the wall in the hope that it might stick. Dino Crisis is another good example. The first game treats time travel as a weapon of mass destruction. The second uses it to create a looping knot of unresolved plot twists. It's just inevitable. The second you introduce even the possibility of time travel, you effectively start a countdown to Clown World, no matter how serious a story may be. What sets Decade apart is that it willingly embraces the inherent madness of time travel without ever sacrificing its dour tone. It's still Clown World, but it's sad. It's sad Clown World. That extends to the characters too. Again, the Terminator films make for an apt comparison. Decade is not the first work of time travel fiction to focus on people from a dead-end future going back to change the past. But Mons, Jag, and Euler aren't soldiers like Kyle Reese. They're children, being ordered around by someone not much older than themselves. Wick, or whatever you choose to name the player character, is only 17 himself, and at the start of the game, that power dynamic makes sense. The kids speak and act like children. Wick has to do his best to parent them, to provide for them by braving the outside world to scavenge for supplies, to make the tough decisions. But it's a role he never really grows out of. Mons, Jag, and Euler all grow and mature and change, while Wick stays the same. As time goes on, they try to talk to him as his peers, as equals, but he still sees them as children, even as they age into their twilight years. At one point, Jag suggested to Wick that maybe it'd be better to just find a peaceful time in the past and settle for a quiet life, but he wouldn't hear it. After a different expedition, Euler confronted Wick about him never using the machine himself, but it already took him 5 years to figure out how to operate it safely. He just doesn't have the time to teach them, and they don't have the time to learn. Better they just keep on keeping on as they are, which is a fucking whopper of an excuse given they're talking about a goddamn time machine. You do have control over Wick's responses, so you can sympathise with or brush off their concerns as you see fit. I chose to play him as single-mindedly focused on finding a better world, given that dream is all he has. He might never offer himself up to the machine, but he also doesn't get to experience life. Jag and Euler and Mons all get to fall in love. They get to rest, even if only for 10 years at a time. All Wick knows, all he's ever known, is survival in a ruined world. He can't let that be the final word, and even in the timelines where humanity doesn't cause its own extinction, he remains disconnected from the people outside the bunker. Saving the world is a noble goal, but Wick is not a good person, at least not from what I saw. He's a control freak with a saviour complex who nonetheless seemed quite resentful of the opportunities to live Mons, Jag, and Euler get, despite the dangers they often faced, as well as the people brought into existence by his temporal meddling. A part of him wants to be congratulated for saving the world, in that youthful fashion where fame and success feels only one good day away, but it's something he can never actually achieve. In one timeline where humanity regressed, returned to monkey, if you will, Wick found himself ostracised by everyone for wanting to think and speak. In another, where the old came to dominate the world, his efforts went unrecognised due to his young age, and even years later, he was living paycheck to paycheck on the verge of a breakdown, wishing for a better life. His drive to find a better future is another way Decade injects new life into the time travel framework. It's why he can't settle for a merely peaceful life in a past period of stability. It's why he can't waste a second of his life anywhere but the present. The time machine offers them all limitless possibilities, good futures, bad futures, weird futures, sad futures, but Wick is only willing to accept a perfect future. But let's go back to the beginning. One thing you'll quickly learn is that Decade isn't just a game about time travel, it's a game about philosophy. Every period you visit and every new timeline you create is built around a specific ideology, and most of the game is spent trying to replace the ruling school of thought in an attempt to produce a better future. The lot of them are given fictional names, but I'm sure if you're familiar with philosophy, you'll be able to pick out their real-world influences. For example, the first school school of thought you encounter, vetiverism, values strength and independence above all, and considers violence to be virtuous. Vetiverism, at least in the original timeline, emerged from the corpse of Nerolianism, a philosophy that favours singular focus. People are expected to do and be good at one thing. Artists are meant to create little, and anything considered wasteful is to be pushed aside and forgotten. It's a period of peaceful prosperity that is culturally sterile, which is how a few centuries later, vetiverism is able to subsume Nerolianism as the dominant school of thought and send humanity hurtling toward extinction. But the two are hardly alone. Meddling with time will introduce you to other schools of thought, the Cedarists, who are looking to quietly control the world through technology, and the Bergamists, who take a more religious outlook to things. And those are just the four you're likely to encounter whatever you do. Vetiverism in particular is a violent little cockroach that won't fuck off no matter how many changes you make. In one time it even rebranded to Steel Core, and the characters still noted how it was the same philosophy under a different name. In the early game it almost feels like you're trying to perform a balancing act with these fictionalized philosophies, to exert just enough influence over events to level the scales and keep one from overwhelming the others. But it's a fool's errand. Vetiverism, Nerolianism, Bergamism, Cedarism, they're all ultimately just set dressing through which Decade can explore its own philosophy on human nature. There are certain ideas that the game proposes to be universal truths by depicting them as cyclical or inevitable, the most obvious being that peace and prosperity is unsustainable. Even if a civilization is successful, war or violence will always be necessary to keep society from collapsing out of boredom. It couches the idea in non-violent terms at certain points too. That psychic wound I mentioned before comes from a time of overpopulation where nonetheless every need is met, yet humanity is still in decline because, the treatise posits, with all the blank spaces on the map filled in, without anywhere left to explore, there's no goal to strive toward except outer space. In the time the psychic wound treatise is written, it's too late to reach the stars, but if you take the idea to an earlier, even more overpopulated decade, you can change the flow of history so that humanity does pierce the heavens, or at least the rich do. Everyone else is left back home to die. It seems innocent enough, well, maybe fun is the wrong word, an interesting chapter in Decade's non-linear narrative, but the underlying idea is also the rhetoric used by certain powers across the 19th and 20th centuries to justify wars of conquest and imperialism. It was expected that great powers control far-flung empires, and Imperial Germany was a little disgruntled at being so late to the party. Framing the whole thing as an aspiration to discover the unknown also carefully sidesteps the reality that during the golden age of exploration, all that gold, god, and glory came at the cost of multiple genocides across multiple continents, whose people definitely didn't consider the lands they lived in unexplored. Space exploration has a certain nobility to it compared to the terrestrial expeditions of centuries past, because right now there's no one to actually take anything from. It's guilt-free colonization, but the Psychic Wound Treatise doesn't see it that way. It's merely the best alternative on offer. If there were undiscovered places still to go on Earth, they would be preferable. I'm not the only one to notice these aspects of the game. Crybaby Hellbitch on Steam, great name by the way, picked them up too, and made a point even I missed about how while Decade engages with these ideas, it very rarely makes an effort to interrogate them. I'm not that well versed in philosophy, so I'll let Crybaby Hellbitch take it from here. Quote, I would like the author to maybe put down Decline of the Roman Empire and maybe pick up a few sociology texts. This might seem like a weird nitpick, and I want to make it clear I really liked the game. It's got a strong concept and a really powerful atmosphere. Over and over I find myself saying, come on man, this ain't how the world works. There's some weird treatment of women and some paleocon ideas about war and violence being necessary for a society to not fall into suicidal ennui that aren't just espoused by specific characters, but are a repeated theme that plays out across timelines. timelines, end quote. Since we're on the topic, Decade's treatment of women does strike me as a little odd sometimes too. There is one ending where most women are unknowingly transformed into so-called sirens in order to control the male population by the Cedarist elite who run the world, and it might be the worst cinematic in the game. Worst that I've found anyway. There's also the fact that both Mons and Eula fall for Wick in absentia regardless of your choices, and there's even one conversation where Wick can declare Eula's greatest quality to be her fertility or sensuality if she's the first person to use the machine, which, given from his perspective 3 minutes ago she was 11 years old and he still treats her like a child, is really fucking weird. You have a similar conversation with Jag, but the question is better framed around his and Wick's relationship, over whether Jag still sees him as a leader or a father or an elder brother, despite now being older than him. I also found one error where the population was controlled by drugs, and in order to combat declining birth rates, the people in power just made women hornier. And I don't think I've even made it to the horniest timeline. Who knows what carnal horrors await in a Lavenderist future? As a counterpoint, Mons is pretty active in both plot and personality, though it can be sometimes hard to tell given how much dialogue is recycled between all three kids. But yes, Crybaby Hellbitch definitely has a point. The vibe is a little bit off in some places, though given the bleak tone overall, it didn't ruin the experience for either of us, at least according to the rest of the review. But getting back to the previous point, a lot of the time Decade takes its underlying universal ideas at face value. You're given the opportunity to call out the contradiction of society in the biomass era prolonging human lives at the cost of personal health and happiness, but statements like, quote, the larger the population is, the easier it is to control, end quote, or, quote, any civilization is always destined to collapse under the weight of its own success, end quote, often go uncommented upon by both Wick and the kids. Periods of overpopulation or peace in Decade are always treated as stagnant. In my over 6 hours of playing the game, I have not once found an era of stability that wasn't also on track for the mother of all implosions, or calcification into a dystopian police state, and that simply isn't reflective of real-world history. This is not inherently a bad thing. Even if I don't agree with most of what the game is saying under the surface, it's still got me engaged through its creativity. Like with the reason why the kids don't abandon Wick once they grow up, we wouldn't really have a game if it didn't work this way. I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't find it compelling in spite of its own biases. But consider how much better it would serve Wick's character for there to be potential futures where these preconceptions are rejected, where stability and population growth don't result in yet another hellscape, where things are just fine. His pursuit of a perfect future would come off as a lot more selfish if the alternatives weren't always so extremely shit, and that would better align with his characterization in the conversations between him, Mons, Jag, and Eula, regardless of the direction the player steers him toward. Before I continue, I'm going to set down another spoiler warning, because I'm about to get into the specific details of the plot, and I know some of you may have ignored the first one and wished they hadn't. So if you want to experience Decade for yourself, go to here. In the 10 seconds it took for that spoiler break to pass, I went and played the game for another few hours, got a few more endings, I'm now up to 13 of 20, and yeah, it definitely went some places I was not expecting. One thing I discovered is that Wick isn't the only one with ideas on how to build a better future. Mons and Jag and Eula all have personal quests to follow in certain timelines where they'll do their best to bring about a better world. I found all three, but only followed Mons and Jag's quests to completion, and what differentiates them from Wick is that their ideas of a better world are always personal to the core group. Jag creates a Blade Runner-style corporate dystopia to serve their every need, and Mons frames them as gods of an expansionist empire to be pampered and preened upon their emergence from the bunker, but both are done at the expense of everyone else, something that is made clear in the Monzian Empire timeline where, without further intervention taken from Wick and Jag and Eula, Mons' plan will implode and you'll wake up to find the mountain bunker encased in concrete to stop your foretold emergence. At first glance, these endings seem like the sort of generally okay future I was talking about, but both ring a little hollow given once the four leads die, everything is just going to go back to the cycle of martial golden age and peaceful stagnation seen throughout the rest of the game. You haven't saved the world, you've only saved yourselves. I haven't seen Eula's ending, but I imagine it's much the same, though given her quest's point of divergence is much earlier in the chronology, there's a chance that I'm wrong. Decade's temporal shenanigans hinge on a period of history called the Great Smothering, where humanity's past was wiped clean by Pierre Coty and the Nerolians to start fresh, and given the time machine requires knowledge of previous eras to actually reach them, the Great Smothering is effectively one big roadblock in your quest to save the world. I spent the first half of the game just trying to slip my way past it, and it was not easy. Pierre Coty was fucking thorough, and every timeline where the Great Smothering occurs is pretty much fucked. It's a bottleneck moment that unknowingly seals humanity's fate centuries in advance, including Jag's cyberpunk dystopia. Even the change you need to make to reach Mons' quest occurs just before the Smothering, within Pierre Coty's lifetime. It's simply one of those periods where the aftershocks are felt absolutely everywhere. The Great Smothering can be overcome though, and on my initial completed playthrough, it felt like such a victory. It's a clever trick the game pulls. By destroying all evidence of human history and culture, the Nerolians keep the distant past as much a surprise to the player as all the possible futures. But by this point, you can probably guess what you'll find. Another war, ironically named the Final War, despite being the very earliest era you can visit, and multiple periods of philosophical conflict as the world marched toward Nerolian dominance and the Great Smothering. Yours is merely the latest apocalypse in a long cycle of growth and decay, which certainly serves the poetry of the game, but comes off as more Dark Souls-style fantasy than reflective of real-world societal trends. Either way, changing the timeline in a period before the Great Smothering is what nets you the strangest changes, and is the only way to find Wick's perfect future. It's also the area of the game I've explored the least, because getting to it is so fucking hard. An easy way to do it is to send one of the kids back to the time of the Great Smothering with a stack of newspapers from the future to play the stock market and amass some power, while also learning everything about pre-smothering artifacts that they can. But the way through I discovered on my original canon campaign was to erode Nerolianism, introduce the treatise on humanity's psychic wound from the stagnant end of this new fork in the river to the immediate still not quite stagnant aftermath, and then visit one of the resulting time periods where an interest in the past had re-emerged, and it was no longer taboo to hide humanity's history. It was a great run, but it took a lot of experimenting, and all three kids were well into their 40s by the time I managed it. From that point, I more or less lucked my way into the perfect ending. I've already mentioned how the kids will bring back random crap to clutter up your inventory from time to time, but it's not all actually useless. Collect the right assortment of knickknacks and doodads, and eventually you'll find yourself in possession of a cymatic interrupter. It needs about 3 or 4 pieces to spawn, I'm not exactly sure, and each part has alternatives scattered throughout the game, so you don't need to follow a specific route through the time stream to get it. Explore enough and you will eventually find it. But once you do, you're free to create Wick's perfect future. The cymatic interrupter is a weapon of mass destruction, so devastating that it can change the course of the final war, something that has, up to this point, been impossible. By the time I acquired it in my playthrough, both Mons and Eula were in their 70s, and Jag had passed away from old age, so it was a real last-ditch effort, a final desperate attempt to set things right. We all understood there wouldn't be another chance. Mons and Eula were both too old, and Wick too stubborn. It was do or die. But it worked. The cymatic interrupter didn't just end the final war, it erased everything that came from it. A single white line reaching from the distant past to the unfamiliar present with nothing in between is such a striking image after the game-long knot of abandoned timelines. There was no mistaking it. This is the perfect future Wick wanted, so it only makes sense that this perfect future is the only one Wick can never actually have. The bunker survived, but is once again encased, not by a wall, but by the mountain itself. There's no way to leave with the doors sealed by rock, except via the machine. I had Wick send Mons and Euler out into this new present through the machine with instructions not to return. Not that they probably could at their ages. Alone in the bunker, Wick was left with only one option: use the machine himself. It's left ambiguous as to whether it worked. It was a fantastic ending to my 4-hour playthrough, a catharsis after so many terrible futures. Decade is one of those story-based games where the journey of an initial playthrough is so magical and compelling. Once I went back to it and started to get a sense of how it worked behind the curtain, a little of that magic was lost, not to mention the constant crashing. But it's still got its hooks in me. Player choice in story-driven games is so often hobbled by the limits of budget and time, but Decade has such an economy of creativity that it was able to sidestep a lot of the usual problems. The choices carry weight, and the consequences are wild and varied, and it's engaging to play despite how stripped down the mechanics are. Decade is a game willing to sink its teeth into subjects like philosophy and history, and expects you to meet it in the discussion. It's a title that could only come from a single developer. It's got such a focused vision that multiple creators would have only muddied the waters, for better or worse. I didn't always agree with what it was trying to say, but it definitely got me thinking, and I absolutely enjoyed the ride. My only regret is that I don't have a time machine of my own to go back and play the game again fresh. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon: Anonymous, Abril, Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Heavy, Jeffiet, Jeff Ladd, Kim, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Reaper2122, Let the Cats Out, Sminglis, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, The Official 476, This Sauerkraut, Thomas Angel, Thomas Elliott, Tree3, Angry Bees, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. This video and everything I make for the channel is now made possible by their generous support. I don't make money off ads and I don't take sponsors, so if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. And if you can't support monthly or just don't want to give Patreon money, Ko-Fi is also an option. But if financial support isn't possible and you still want to help the channel out, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video around because YouTube sure won't. Links are in the description. Anyway, next time we'll be going back to the past in a slightly less philosophical way. Look out for that next month. I'll see you then. Thanks again for watching.